for the sake of time and for the sake of the flow of our event tonight, I'm going to be reading the questions instead of trying to bring people live so that we get through more as many as we can. But if you want to ask a question live, look at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're joining us on Zoom, there's a Q&A button. Hit that, and you can type your question right into the queue, and we may get to it. If you're joining us on the website at lincolnproject.us/live or on YouTube, you will not be able to ask a question. Just listen to the answers. I am really excited to introduce you to three of my fellow co-founders this evening. First, Reed Galen, who's an independent political strategist who has worked for President George W. Bush, Senator John McCain, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. And Reed, thank you for being on again tonight.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for having me, and hello, everybody.
And Rick Wilson, who is a legendary ad maker and the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Everything Trump Touches Dies. Rick, thanks for being on again.
Thanks, Ron. Good to be with you all tonight.
And Jennifer Horn, who's a communications strategist and former chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party. Jennifer, it's great to have you back again.
Always great to be here. I appreciate everybody who's tuning in tonight. And
last but certainly not least, former political director for the California State Republican Party, Mike, I eat polls for breakfast, Madrid. Mike.
Good to be with you guys.
Everyone will get that joke in a little while. Okay, how about just to set the table, Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind, telling folks about the reason the Lincoln Project exists and its importance in this moment in history and the significance of this moment and this movement.
Well, I don't think there's anybody left in America who really needs to be told why an effort like the Lincoln Project exists. You know, we said from the beginning it was to defeat Trump and Trumpism. If you don't understand that Donald Trump poses an existential threat to the future of our country, to democracy as we know it in America, I don't know how to convince you of that. And, you know, at this point, after everything that we've seen happen, not just the last 3.5 years, just look at the last 6 months, the last 7 months in this country, that Donald Trump is dangerous. He's not just, you know, oh, he's not a real politician. He's an outsider, that he's dangerous. He's not just divisive. He's not just racist. He's not just a misogynist. He poses a direct danger to the future of our country, and he's got to be defeated. And when we talk about Trump and Trumpism, we are talking about going after those Republicans in the Senate who have supported him and enabled him and protected him. And there's no better example of why that's important than the report that just came out, the intelligence report that just came out of the Senate, written by a Republican majority of senators, identifying and confirming that the Trump campaign did, in fact, collude with Russian and other, foreign influences in this election. And that is a report that was written by Republican senators that's been in the making for over a year now, year and a half. They knew all along, they knew what a danger he was, and they're still standing there today defending him. That's why this is so important.
Mike, I want to go to you next before we kick it over to Reed for a race on an update on the Senate races. But can you give everyone a sort of wide angle update on the presidential race as it stands right now?
Sure. There's a couple of things that we need to keep in mind as we enter kind of the 75 days of this race. The first is, in many ways, it's following a very typical and predictable pattern of gelling back into the partisan trenches that Republicans and Democrats typically fall into. You've heard us talk about this quite a bit. If you're following us on social media, I hope that most of you are. We've always said from the beginning that this is going to be a close race. Nobody was going to squash anybody else like an eggplant or anything like that. This is going to be a hard-fought race that will come down to a handful of states. What is interesting, however, is, and what has changed, is the battlefield has undeniably expanded. It is not just a handful of states. It's actually 2 handfuls of states. And on its face, that is probably a net good thing for Joe Biden's campaign. The more the battlefield is spread out, the more areas of opportunity and the more places that Donald Trump has to defend. But the margins may be thinner than they have been in the past. And that's something that we need to be mindful of. So while some states like Pennsylvania or in Ohio may close up and get a little bit tighter, you are starting to see states like Arizona, Georgia, even Texas start to look as they're opening up and becoming more in play. That has a lot to do with the transformation of the Republican electorate, the Republican coalition. And what we have noticed in an unprecedented fashion is this wide break between college-educated Republican voters and non-college educated voters. That split is manifesting politically and geographically. And so this realignment that has been happening really for a number of years, bringing states like Arizona, Texas, Georgia, North Carolina into the Democratic fold, or moving them into a more purple hue, if you will, a more moderate state position, it is making the battlefield, again, a much bigger, broader place. The good news is, of course, this has been anticipated. Lincoln Project's been on this for some time. I think you'll be hearing some news about that in the coming days and or weeks. In fact, I'm certain that you will. We'll wait until it's more timely to kind of talk about some of that. But again, this is not your grandfather's map to 270. It is a little bit different, and it is going to have some significant changes in the way we tactically approach this race. The fundamentals, really briefly, before we hand it over to Reed, are such that there are fewer undecideds than there were in 2016. Those undecideds, those leaners as we call them, to figure out, are they leaning Trump, are they leaning Biden, are leaning Biden by a pretty good margin. And more importantly, Biden's numbers, at least at the national level, remain above that all-important 50% threshold. So the race is gelling. It's more stratified than it has been in the past. It's thinner, but there's less room, at least at this point in the race, for movement. And that's where things stand 75 days out before the election.
Thanks, Mike. Reed, over to you first to add anything else you'd like to from the opening remarks, and then if you could just take us sort of state by state into the Senate races that we're targeting, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, first and foremost, thanks, Ron, as always, for leading the ship here. Yeah, look, I think that last night we saw in Vice President Biden, what I was very pleased to see, aside from the fact that he gave a terrific speech, which I knew he would, was that the messaging was really very broad-based. It was about being an American, about the choice that Americans have to make. And from a policy perspective, I think the very smart thing he did was that he made a very clear distinction about what it means to be the next president of the United States, which is not a Democrat who may have a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, but a president who on day one must start the business of getting rid of COVID, curing COVID, or vaccinating, whatever it is, but getting it under control. Because until and unless that happens, nobody goes back to work, nobody goes back to school. Normal life as we have known it as Americans will change forever. It's not going back to what it was, but we're not getting to a new normal until and unless we do that. And I think Biden made a very strong case for why he can and will be the person who does that, as opposed to the current occupant, who's still rage tweeting at the television from the residents every night. On the Senate front, and let me just say this too as an aside, as I watch this here now, 8,500 people or more in Zoom, and I think there are more on YouTube. And let me just say how humbled and flattered we are that all of you take your time every evening that we do one of these things, whether or not it's nationally, whether or not it's with a particular coalition, or whether or not it's in your particular state, that you all take your time to sit here and be with us and understand how we're all going to do this together. Because I think as the vice president said, and I think as some of our partners in all this have started to say, this isn't a Republican or a Democratic, an independent, a conservative, whatever coalition. This is an American coalition. There are people watching and listening right now, people who, share our content, people who make phone calls for us, people who text message their friends on our behalf. They see themselves as Americans first, and whatever partisan stripe they might have had second. And I think that I could not be prouder to be a part of this with all of you. Next, on the Senate side, we have a lot of friends back in DC who work on Republican Senate races. Some of them are dear friends. And what I would say is that, when we started this back in December, and I should note that we made it very clear from the moment that we started, I think almost 8 months ago to the day, that the Republican senators who have abandoned their oaths and their responsibilities would be on the block for us from this point of view. That started with 3 races. We were looking at North Carolina, Arizona, and Colorado. We are now probably up to 9 or 10. Arizona, North Carolina, Colorado, those may be the furthest away from a Republican being able to hold those seats. You now see Alaska, Montana, obviously Maine, Iowa. I was on the phone yesterday with someone who said they'd seen polling that the Democratic nominee in Kansas is up 2 points. And so what I think you're seeing, you hear Mike talking about the fact that there might not be many undecideds left, but that doesn't mean that the tsunami isn't building and is ready to crash. And we'll get into what that means, not only for the next 75 days, but what that means for the actual, act of voting that I think we all need to really take seriously. But I think what you're seeing is that Republicans, as Jennifer, I think, so rightly noted, have abdicated whatever form of conservatism or republicanism they had. They're not fiscal conservatives. They don't believe in a muscular and a more moral foreign policy. And they're certainly not believers in individual liberty, as any of us would have worked for years ago, because once you deploy, federal forces into the streets, there was a time when they would have been screaming 10th Amendment. If you go back to the Bill Clinton days, they were always talking about the ATF. If President Obama had done something like this, they would have impeached him for it. And so I think that they have ceased to be whatever it is they were, and they should really have T's behind their names now. And I think, as Jennifer noted, you saw that they knew for 18 months that they had come to a conclusion that the Trump campaign and the Russians were in cahoots. They acquitted him anyway, right? So we have now surpassed silence and complicity with these folks. They have now taken active measures to ensure that they are protecting a guy who deserves no protection from any of us. And certainly I don't think we'll receive any protection from the voters come this November. So I think that what we see in the Senate races is, again, there's a lot more competitive races than the Republicans probably hold on to. That doesn't mean that they won't all go down to the wire. As Mike noted, all of this stuff ends up close. But I think that what you're likely to see is that Mitch McConnell and his team are going to have to start deciding probably within the next week or 10 days where they believe they can win and where it's already a lost cause. And you're going to hear a whole lot of howling and screaming from Republicans that get a call from probably not McConnell personally, but probably one of his guys that say, Senator, I hate to tell you this, but we're not giving you $10 million. We're giving you $1 million. And so I think that's what we see as we head into the fall. So thank you again, everybody. And Ron, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Reed. And I also want to echo the thanks to all of you taking the time tonight to be with us. And we have so many questions, and they're all good questions, and we're not going to get to them all. So what I'm going to try and do is read as diverse a set of them as possible so that we get to as many topics as we can. So to begin with, let's go to Carolyn Jordan, who writes in, she'd like to know our opinion on the effectiveness of the Democratic National Committee's convention. And Reed, we just taped a podcast this morning. It should be out shortly here, where we did a whole lot on this. And if you're interested in checking out the podcast, it's lincolnproject.us/podcast. You can get it on Apple and Google and Spotify and anywhere you get your podcasts. But do you want to start with take us around the whole convention and how effective you thought it was, and then Jennifer, Mike, Rick, will go to each of you for your take.
Sure. I was, lucky enough or unlucky enough to work at my first Republican convention when I was 16 years old. And so I've seen a lot of these close up. I spent three months in Philadelphia during the 2000 convention. From the moment that we took ownership of I don't even know what they call it, but the arena. And the months and months of work and planning that went into that, so that ultimately at the time Dick Cheney and George W. Bush could get up and accept their nominations. They had to do all this on the fly. And I think that the fact that they could do it, make it as seamless as it was, not to say that it was perfect, but certainly seamless is probably a pretty good adjective. I thought they were very creative. I thought that they took a blank slate and made a lot of it. I thought the roll call piece where they went, to all 50 states and the 7 territories, I thought was really fun. I thought it probably gave a lot of Americans a chance to see some places that they're never going to see or never going to go, and to really express the dynamism and, the different, people who all call themselves Americans, regardless of where they live or how they look. And so I thought they did a good job. And I think they also did a good job of keeping it about Americans more broadly. A lot of times, what happens is you can get stuck in the trap. Well, I have to keep this group happy and I have to keep that group happy. So you have some speakers who just go off the rails. I think we could probably count Ted Cruz in 2016 as one of those where, I think, if the security people had not held back the delegates, they probably would have ripped them off the stage and maybe we'd all be better for it. But I think that I think they did a very good job, both from a production standpoint and from a messaging standpoint. I thought that the videos they did, the interstitials they did on the families were incredible. I thought the young man who introduced Biden hey, look, I'm not crying, you're crying when you watch something like that, right? And I thought it was just a terrific thing. And look, the fact that they centered so much of this around family and how important family is to these two nominees, regardless of their politics, was no accident. And I think they executed it extremely well.
Yeah. Hey, Rick, I want to go to you next for
Sure.
Yeah.
Look, I think the convention, Ron, was very representative of this post-COVID era. And, if it had happened cold this way, it would have been a shock. But everyone spent the last 6 months, because of this president's utter incompetence, living through Zoom, living through FaceTime, living through this very interesting digital window into the universe now. And for all that, I think they really did manage to humanize and to show the depth of love from Biden's family and the people whose lives he's touched. And I was noticing that last night. And I was thinking to myself, you couldn't find 5 people in this world who think that way about Donald Trump. And it really says something about the way Joe Biden has behaved as a human being. And I have a story. A few years ago, a retired Republican U.S. senator said to me, I'm getting up there. And he says, you know what I want when I die? I'm like, what's that? He says, I want Joseph Robinette Biden to read my eulogy because he's the best man I've ever known. And at the time I was like, well, that's an interesting observation. But you kind of saw that last night. You kind of saw that the depth to which he influences people's lives. And one other thing about this, we talked about this on the LPTV live stream last night. And folks, will be doing the LPTV live stream again next week for the Republican National Crazy event. One of the things that we've been hearing from the Republicans for months and months is Joe Biden's lost it. He's senile. He's got dementia. He can't speak. He's shaky. He falls apart. Well, the guy went up and delivered a 25-minute oration that was beautifully delivered, that was right to point, right to camera. And I think it was a big win for Biden personally and for the Democratic National Committee.
Yeah.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, yes to all of the above. A couple of things. First of all, I said it on the podcast this morning, that young man, that extraordinary, courageous young man who introduced Vice President Biden, I was ugly mom crying watching that. I just, and the thing was, like, I was just overwhelmed with pride, like maternal pride. And I don't know the young man. He's from New Hampshire, but and I really think that was kind of emblematic of the whole thing, in that they were able to touch people's hearts in a way that you don't always see at a convention. Conventions are generally all about unifying your base after a rough primary. It's 99% focused on your people and getting them together, and you just cross your fingers, to Reed's point, and hope that nobody says anything that's going to screw you up in the general election. These guys were really effective at broadening their base during the convention. They were so unified already going in there. They were able to spend 20% or more of their time talking to Republicans, talking to independents. That's a huge advantage for them. And they did it really, really well. And that's coming from somebody who was chairman of a state Republican Party. I got a text last night at 11:30 from one of my favorite people in the New Hampshire Republican Party, who's a former town chair, saying to me, he thought that Biden had knocked it out of the park, that he was really effective, that he was, this guy is looking, he said, I'm watching next week to see what they do, but Biden's got my attention. And that's really powerful in a race, to Mike's point, that is going to be as close as it is.
Yeah. All right, Mike, over to you. And same question, but also I want you to talk a little bit about the poll bump that we should expect to see coming out of this convention. How long will it last? How important is it? Gets to the effectiveness question.
So in terms of polling, there's traditionally about a 5 to 6 point bounce after these conventions, which has narrowed considerably. 20 years ago, you could expect a 13 to 17 point bounce. Right. A large swath of undecideds as Americans were genuinely considering, like, whose tax policy, whose foreign policy do I like? We are so hyper polarized right now that what would probably be, I would be surprised if you saw a 3 to 5% bounce in the national polls, maybe even smaller in some of the battleground states, and it's not going to last terribly long, okay? The same is likely to happen after the Republicans do their convention, depending on what it is that we see coming out of the Republican convention. So a lot of these things aren't the same indicators that they used to be. Conventions don't have the same effect on public opinion that they used to have. Debates don't have the same effect on public opinions that they used to have. Remember, there's a hard floor under Biden right now, sitting at 49 to 50%. It's not like something like a convention. If Donald Trump has a great speech, people are going to suddenly say, "Oh yeah, that was a great speech. I'm with Trump now." Like that's not a thing, okay? And so what happens in this environment, the traditional polling bumps, they might be just a gauge of kind of a soft clap of approval. Okay, job well done. The key here was the messaging and getting the messaging right. And I think everybody articulated that exactly right. There's no question the Democrats did what they needed to do. Biden had the convention he needed to get done. Frankly, I think it was amazing. I don't know if we ever go back to in-person conventions, by the way.
Yeah, why would you? Hey, Ron, can I just say a couple of things? One is, I mean, when's the last time we watched anything related to American politics at the national level and you felt good?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I couldn't tell you the last time I felt good after watching something. And I felt good. I mean, it was realistic, but it wasn't pessimistic.
Right.
It was sad, but it wasn't bitter.
Right.
And those things, you know, there's differences to those things.
Yeah.
And so
it was
I think
inspirational.
Yeah. And because it made it about something bigger, as Mike said.
Right.
We should pine for the times when we argued about marginal tax rates. Right. That meant things were working.
Yeah.
Now we're in a place where, you know, they've come in, they've done what they've needed to do. And I think that, you know, there's also probably a lot of folks, you know, that we've talked to, and I know Jennifer spends a lot of time with, who were, you know, a little bit concerned that if Biden won, they were going to get the, you know, sort of clean slate of progressive policies.
Right.
But I think that the Biden folks understand, you know, again, as I said, until you fix the whole thing, nothing else is going to get done.
Yeah.
Right.
I think I said this on the podcast, but to me, you know, the whole thing encapsulated was that they did a masterful job rekindling the sense that we're all in this together as Americans, which is exactly the sense that Donald Trump has been trying to extinguish for the last 3.5 years.
Right.
Yeah. Next week will be the bizarro version of Joe Biden's convention.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's get to some more questions here. I know that was on everyone's mind, and I think we did that thoroughly. So let's try and go through these a little bit quicker now. So Outweiss from Michigan. Your efforts and experience are vital to defeat the president. I wish the Dems were capable of creating such effective ads. Does the Lincoln Project have grassroots plans to combat the president's voter intimidation and suppression efforts? Rick?
Well, Mike is even better positioned to answer this than I am, but I will say this, folks. We want you to go into this last 70 plus days of this campaign feeling completely fired up and ready to roll. You've got to go into this thing and not let them shake you, not let them scare you, not let them intimidate you, not one single time. Because if you go out and you get your absentee ballot early or you vote in person early, you are giving yourself a huge advantage in this. You're not going to get freaked out by these 17 different September and October surprises they're going to go with. That's not going to be able to jam you up at the last minute and have some governor decide he's going to reduce the number of polling places in a city from 45 to 2. You're not going to be in those positions. Right. So move fast, move quickly into getting your vote in. And, you know, in a lot of states, Michigan right now, I believe you can get your absentee ballot.
You can.
So those are all opening up right now. And I encourage you to move forward quickly on that. Yeah. I think Mike can speak in more granularity.
Yeah, Mike, would you Mike did this incredible riff earlier. It was either earlier this week or last week. Mike, can you give like the 2-minute version of how votes get counted?
And what
so everybody understands.
As we get
closer. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I'll do this. Yeah. So look, and vote by mail is been practiced in a lot of states for decades now. Some states are all vote by mail states, but for those that are not, and there's a larger number of states that are not now, or have not, are now adding an aggressive vote by mail program, as they should, because we're in a pandemic, by the way. But it's important to understand that as these states come in, there's at least two different sets of the way things are counted, okay? Most ballots in most states, not all, but most states set aside all the ballots that are mailed in, and they're set and processed and secured in a place in the county government center to be counted the moment that the polls close at 8 p.m. on November the 3rd. Not all states, there are some exceptions, but most states, okay? It's important because if you look even at what people are saying now with what the messaging that Trump is putting out, is Republicans are increasingly going to be moving towards the election day, okay? That means Democrats, and this has been for 20 years, there's quantifiable data showing this, are going to be voting increasingly by mail, okay? What does that mean? It means that the votes that are counted on election day are going to lean Republican. And these are the votes that more often are disproportionately reflected in the day of count. It means on November 3rd, we are not going to know who the president of the United States is. We would not know that under any circumstance because there are so many ballots that have come in by mail. The days of knowing who the president is going to be by 10 p.m. and popping a champagne bottle and getting ready to make whatever adjustments the next morning.
Or drinking a bottle of rum, depending on the outcome.
Reed's got some experience with both bottles. What's going to happen is on November 4th, the county government centers are going to begin the process of counting mail-in ballots, especially those that come in the last few days before the election. And every day that there is a count, demographically, the gap between the Republicans and the Democrats will shrink in favor of the Democrats. This is why in November of 2018, all the prognosticators and all the media folks said it's just a blue trickle. The Democrats didn't do nearly as well we thought they were going to do in November of 2018. But over days and weeks, as the count kept coming in, it broke sharply for the Democrats. This is going to happen by a factor of 5 or 6 because so many more states are doing this. So on election night, it could very well look like Donald Trump wins Ohio by 1 or 2 points. But when it's done counting in 15 days, he will lose to Biden by 6 percentage points. Very likely scenario. The reason why that's important is because every day we're going to get a new count that is going to show the votes shortening and tightening and benefiting the Democrats. And every day you're going to see messaging coming from the Trump campaign saying they're stealing the election. This is voter fraud. This is QAnon himself with the deep state, every county government center stuffing the ballot box. It's quantifiably false. It's ridiculous, but it is absolutely what they are going to be saying beginning on November 4th until we're able to certify the election, probably 2-3 weeks after we're done on November the 3rd.
Right. And they start with all this stuff now to back it up because they want you discouraged, confused, believing that the system is rigged or it doesn't work because Trump can't win a high turnout election. He only wins a low turnout election. It's part and parcel to everything we've seen with the guy politically, which is only by division and rescission can the president be victorious. He can't do, he is not an additive guy. He's a divisive guy. If subtractive is a word, he's a subtractive guy, a reductive guy. And so I think that that's what you've already started to see. I bet you'll see a lot of that next week as not only the Republicans, whenever they figure out what they're going to do and who's going to talk, but all of this sort of QAnon Bannon weirdos get themselves spun up into a lather are going to, make sure that as they head into September, that everybody's as confused and freaked out as they possibly can be. And when Trump says, oh, I'm going to put sheriffs at polling places, like, A, he can't do that. But B, he knows that he's freaking out some people.
Right.
And he's scaring others who, like, if a sheriff's standing at a polling place, like, they ain't going, right? They're not going to go. And so I think it's voter intimidation of the highest order. It's probably against the law somewhere or everywhere. But that's why I think, as Rick said, you got to vote early. You understand the stuff I just put in the chat. LincolnProject.us vote. Ron and his team have put together all 50 states of how you participate, whether or not you're in an electoral college state that's up for grabs, whether or not you're in a U.S. Senate state that's up for grabs, whether or not you live in California or Kentucky. Like, get out there and participate. You've got to. You've got to.
Yeah, and Ron, just to build on everything we just said, make a plan. Make a plan. Go to LincolnProject.us/vote. Figure out where and when you vote in your state. What day are you going to vote? Who are you going to go with? Have your mask. Have your hand sanitizer. Keep your distance. And by the way, in a lot of states, pack a snack. because they are closing polling places, and they are saying they're doing it for your safety because of the virus. They're doing it in a lot of cases because if the lines are long enough, they know you'll go home. Like, you've got to decide today, how are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? And then just make the commitment. Stay safe, do what you have to do, but you've got to go and you got to get online. And the other thing I tell everybody, no matter what happens, once you are online, do not get off. If they try to close that polling place while you're still online, call your Secretary of State while you are standing online, because they can't do that, but they're going to try to in some parts of this country.
Yes. Okay. We're going to move on.
So Ron says we've only gotten through 2 questions, so we have to stop talking.
Yep. So we're going to try and do these a little bit.
Wait, I've got one more 7-minute point to make.
This is Ron's continual problem, folks, is once he winds us up, we just go to
You have no idea, folks. Okay. Reed Reynolds would love to hear a concise discussion on the traditional core values of the Republican Party contrasted with the current contradiction of them. Jennifer, going to you only if you can make it concise.
Hey.
Is there a time limit for concise? Because here's the thing, the contradiction between traditional Republican values and what we've seen come out of this White House is the entire list of Republican values. There is not a single value or principle that I fought for when I was a candidate, or that I fought for as chairman, that this president or the elected Republicans in Washington have stood on. Are they small government? No. Are they limited spending? No. Are they pro-life? Obviously not. I mean, you go through all of anything that has ever been important to us. Are they strong national defense? Nope. Are they protecting our troops on the battlefield? No. They're ignoring Vladimir Putin when they learn that he's paying bounties on the heads. And I say this all the time. We can't just think of them as that he's paying bounties on the heads of our soldiers. He's paying bounties on the heads of our children. These are our sons and daughters out there. And Donald Trump and his Republican defenders in Congress look the other way. So I can't think of a traditional Republican value that this president has been strong on. And I'll give you my riff on life really quickly, because I'm a pro-life Republican. Donald Trump and the people in the House and Senate who have defended and protected him and the party in general can no longer claim the banner of being the party of life, because they are a party and they are leaders who have literally looked the other way and allowed the loss of 175,000 lives out of narcissism, incompetence, ego, the desire to hold on to power. Tell me what else? How far back in our history do we have to go to find an event, a moment in our history where 170,000 Americans lost their lives in 4 or 5 months? We are not the party of life if we are putting children in cages for any reason at all. I can go through the list of assaults on human dignity that have come out of this president and his defenders in the House and the Senate that have simply null and voided any right they had to call themselves the party of life. So I can't, I'm afraid, to whoever asked the question, I'm afraid I can't think off the top of my head of a core Republican value that they have embraced and protected and defended.
Thanks, Jennifer. Okay, Mary Check. Will the release of the GOP-led Senate Intelligence Committee report on the 2016 election sway any minds or cause Trump to lose some Republican support?
You mean the Rubio report?
The Rubio report.
It's the Rubio report.
Yeah, the Rubio report. You want to take that one?
Look, the Rubio report, it contains a number of things from the Senate Intelligence Committee that are damning in ways that everyone understood before Bill Barr went out and falsely portrayed the Mueller report. It shows the levels of connection and collusion with the Russians. And the most damning effect of it, though, is that it shows that these members of the US Senate, these people who are so angry that we're targeting some of their members for violating their oath of office, were in on the scam. They know Donald Trump's people were involved with Russia. They know that the Russians were meeting with Don Jr. and Paul Manafort, and Roger Stone was dealing directly with WikiLeaks, which is a Russian intelligence front. All this is revealed in explicit detail. But what is also revealed is the characterless men on this committee, Ron Johnson, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, all of these people who have flat out determined that political support of Donald Trump is more important than their oath to protect this nation. I don't think it's going to change a lot of hearts and minds on the Republican side, but I do know that it is going to be a damning piece of evidence going forward. It is going to continue to be brought up by us and many other people because it shows that this president is not fit to lead this country, and his enablers are not fit to hold the offices they currently occupy.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, and I think the way to make this politically tangible is to ensure that we are putting pressure on those Republican senators and reminding them and their constituents, frankly, whose side are you on? Are you on the side of the Americans, of America, the United States of America, the people you represent? Or are you on the side of, the GRU and the Internet Research Agency and the Kremlin? Because if you stand up with Trump, you're implicitly saying, well, I'm okay with these things.
Yeah.
And that's, from our perspective, they need to be held to account for it, as we've said from day one. And, it's hard to believe that this close to the election now, they still find other ways to make themselves more, more likely and more needed to be held accountable.
Yeah.
True.
Mike, this next one's to you. Barbara Kelly says, why is Trump gaining on Biden lately? So I want you to take that and talk about the difference between likely voter and registered voter polls, and then also how to read and whether or not to read national polls.
Never read national polls.
Exactly. First, never read national polls. But the second thing to keep in mind, and I'm going to say something that's going to sound a little bit strange, but listen closely. He may be closing the gap, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's catching up. Okay. And the reason why that's important is because when you hit a 50% threshold, there's no place to go up beyond that. There might be undecided voters where Trump is picking up some, but the truth of the matter is what is really happening is he lost so many Republican voters. Remember, there was even Rasmussen saying he was at 79% approval amongst Republican voters in the early part of the summer as the COVID problem was as widespread as it was. A number of those Republicans are starting to come back into the fold. It does not mean that he is catching up to him in an electoral sense rather than consolidating the base. So I know it sounds a little bit peculiar and anomalous, but when we're looking at the race and the outcome of a race, once a candidate has a floor at about 50%, it's looking pretty darn good. There's only so much upside. It doesn't matter whether you win by 50 to 41 or 50 to 48, you're still at that same threshold level. So I know that's a peculiar way to make it sound, but it's not like it was in 2016 where both candidates were 7-8 points under that 50% margin and there were 15% undecided. There's just not that many undecided left. What he is picking up is Republicans that are coming home. It's why the Lincoln Project work is so important, because our goal is to keep that Republican base off of him as much as we can. We're not trying to win 50% of Republicans. We're trying to win a very small sliver of Republicans, and every Republican voter that we get goes a very long way. Now, another quick caveat. You're going to see a ton of polls saying a million different things in the next 75 days. I would strongly urge you not to watch them as closely as crazy people like I do, because you'll end up with this much hair by the end of this. It will drive you absolutely nuts trying to discern what is happening and what is going on. Each poll has its own methodology. Each poll is trying to figure out and discern different data sets, and to try to compare all of them makes absolutely no sense. So in the past few cycles, what people have started to do is they're taking an average of the rolling polls, putting all the methodologies into one big pot and seeing what comes out, and it gives you a better general sense of the race.
Right.
Probably the best way to do it if you're kind of a casual observer, but it's extremely important that for you to understand that there is a very clear science behind public opinion surveys. And unless you are looking deep into the crosstabs and understand the methodology, it's probably not telling you what you think it's telling you. The horse race of who's ahead and who's above is really not as important as other fundamentals like what is the floor and the ceiling of each candidate? What is the main issue that each candidate is driving that is supporting those upward trajectories or those downward trajectories?
Right.
And how does that fit in the context of the overall trend of the race? So I hate to kind of give it a nerdy pointy-headed answer like that, but be mindful of those polls. I will be talking more about polling surveys. I think we probably will be on podcasts and stuff, because there's going to be so many polls coming out. There's a lot of places to look. Just if it starts to make you nervous or lose sleep, just listen to what I'm telling you. Take a deep breath, go for a walk. What you're putting into your brain with all those polls is probably not what each individual poll is saying. So
yes,
Right.
and if you really like digging into this stuff, Mike came on the podcast and did a really great episode, and I think we called it the Lincoln Project Effect. If you want more Mike Madrid on the numbers, go check out that episode.
Right.
I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, Reed, this one's to you next. Todd Lafer says, please address how the RNC will frame their arguments at their convention.
Well, it will be in black and white. They will do everything they can to convince white suburban voters that those people from the city are coming to get them and to tear down their suburbs. And they're not going to use dog whistles or gaslighting or coded language or any of that stuff. They're going to say it and they're going to show it. And why do you think those two folks, the very wealthy trial lawyers from St. Louis in front of the mansion, why do you think they're there? Because they're going to show the video of those two people, the lady with her handgun and the man with his AR-15, standing in their front lawn as a crowd, a multicultural crowd, marches by their house looking for somebody else, looking for the mayor, I believe, of St. Louis. That's what it's going to be. Because again, this is a reductive exercise. He's got to scare people away, either from the belief that the system works and works for them, or he's got to go back to, the 1968 Richard Nixon Southern strategy of law and order. When he says law and order, that means black people versus white people. That's what that means. It's no more complicated than that. And so for all of the, criminology you can put into Trump, he's transparent and he's a projectionist. He's going to tell you what he's going to do, or he's going to tell you what he's going to try and do. And sometimes in the blizzard of lies, you should believe him. And I always believe that the worst things he says are probably the truth. And so I think that's what you're going to see at the convention next week. Is it's going to be a testament to ugliness. You're going to see a lot of, there'll be a lot of chest pounding on the, the military side of things, which I think we will be prepared for. But believe me, we've seen all 4 nights of what they have to offer. And we will be there to join them in their celebrations. I should say this is that I saw on one of our clips today from our team that Trump and Ivanka are going to North Carolina to visit some sort of farm to food box facility down there. And I think that everybody who lives in North Carolina should remind the president that they're only having to get food in a box because of his both action and inaction. And he wouldn't be visiting that place if he didn't believe that in a performative sense, he needed to show like he was helping, because we know he hasn't been.
Okay, Rick, this next one to you. Ellen Elmore says, why do you think so many evangelicals support Trump, no matter what he says or does? I'm a member of a very large evangelical church, and I feel completely alone in my opposition to Trump. We recently did an evangelical town hall, and we heard from lots of folks, lots of faith leaders on this topic. And so I know we talked that, and I think that one's available. It's pretty long, but do you want to just speak to everybody who's in the same position that Ellen is? Because we heard from a lot of them on that last town hall.
Ellen, that's a terrific question. It's one of the thorniest questions out there. And I'm going to summarize it as cleanly as I can and as quickly as I can. There's a sense among many evangelical conservatives that they are under immediate and existential threat from all sides by worldly forces. And those worldly forces, the only way to counteract them in the political culture of the far-right evangelical movement is not by examples of work and faith and showing a different approach to things. In their minds, the example, the solution has become judges will impose what we want because we can't pass it in the legislative bodies. The president will do what we want because we can't achieve it otherwise. And I think that is a faith crisis that they're going to have to address in the long term. But that is what holds them to Trump, is this fear that the external world is going to destroy everything they hold precious. And Trump very aggressively stokes that belief in their minds whenever he speaks to them. And I always tell evangelical friends, remember when he's speaking to you, this is a faithless man in every possible way. He is using you. He is, as they say in Matthew, one of the wicked counselors. And so, it's important to keep in mind that he can use the words of Scripture. He can use the code words of faith, but they mean nothing to him except as a political end.
Right. I mean, Ron, and Rick makes a good point. The man he is a two-dimensional being in a three-dimensional body. There is no there past whatever it is he's doing. He is a performative beast. That's all there is to it. And he always has been.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, Jennifer, Nellie Porat asks, women will be instrumental in this election. We all know this. Do you have any specific plans to reach them?
Yeah, absolutely, of course. Women aren't just going to be instrumental in this election. Some of the data shows that women they're going to decide, that they're going to decide this election. And a very specific group of women, as we break it down from one state to the next, one county to the next, are going to decide this election. So the people should be reassured. First of all, we're already talking to women. So much of the operation of messaging and connecting with our voters digitally and using the data that Mike puts together and the messages that Rick and his team put together and getting it out there, that's already happening. And it's important for people to understand that. But beyond that, yeah, absolutely. Next week during the Republican National Convention, I think on the 26th, we're going to be hosting our first National Women's Town Hall. And we're going to have a bunch of great guests on there that we'll keep to ourselves for the moment, surprise you with next week. But, I hope that folks will come back and tune in then and, become part of this very active, this active engagement, active movement going forward. And there's something that I want to remind, especially the women on our call tonight, because we don't always remember this about ourselves. First of all, women make up about 51% of the electorate to begin with. With all things being equal, there are more of us out there voting to begin with most years.
And thank God for that.
And that's where I was headed, Reed. And thank God for that. Because the other thing that is true that we have seen in years past, as we've done polling and looking at this, is that people take a woman's guidance and suggestion and advice on polling more seriously than a man's. That they listen to I don't know why, but they do. It's so important.
No, you absolutely know why, Jennifer. You don't have to soft sell us.
Because we're right. but they do. And we have to embrace that power. We have to embrace that influence that we have. And you have to understand, we have to know that our voice really is listened to and it matters and it counts. And it's a great, reference back to the Democratic Convention. Look at all those strong women that they went out of their way to put women in positions of leadership and putting them, on the stage to message. Republican and Democratic women in that convention. And there's a reason why. So please come for our Women's Town Hall next week, but also just in this moment, you need to embrace the power and the influence that you have to begin with and go out there and start using it.
Yeah. Okay, Stephanie McMillan Sherry, and this is to all of you, and let's try to keep the takes as quickly as short as we can. But will the Republican Party survive Trumpism?
Yeah, in the way that a red giant star survives shedding its outer core and becomes a white dwarf.
I was going to say, I don't think that it survives a continued embrace of Trumpism. No, I think that the long range forecast for the Republican Party, if they continue to embrace Trumpism, is ultimately death. That it can't survive this. Something else over the next generation will blossom to take its place.
Rick?
I think there's a need in this country for some kind of center-right party that believes in things like the Constitution, the rule of law, individual liberty, personal integrity. Those things are not manifested now in the Republican Party as it exists under Donald Trump. And I think they are anathema to the party now, which essentially exists to praise Trump and own the libs. That's the whole sum of the philosophy. So maybe it survives as a brand name, And like the 1972 Pinto that's up on blocks at the guy's house down the street is still a car in some way, but it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Mike?
I like to say that the Republican Party won't be dead, but it'll be like a zombie. It'll be undead. I mean, there will be like a body, but not much of a soul or anything inside of it, and it will continue to
Totally.
it'll sort of decline for the next generation. It'll just it'll become a marginal regional party focusing on even smaller demographics. Unless Q comes out and saves them, then maybe.
And then Ron, just know that we do our metaphor workshops every Thursday after.
Okay. Okay, let's do, I want to do one more here, and this is to you, Mike. From Irving Schloss, who do you see as swing voters in this election? And then if you want to take it in addition to the second part, which is, and do you see botched school reopenings as providing leverage to worried parents?
Well, there's two critical swing groups that exist. The first one is very predictable and has been on a swing trajectory away from Republicans ever since Donald Trump became the nominee, and that is college-educated suburban voters. That's really got to be the determining factor in this election. So it's specifically women, by the way. In fact, Republican suburban women have moved so decisively that there's now opportunity to get stubborn men on board and say, women have figured this out, start following the lead, would you? And that is the main swing demographic. The other swing, and this is tied to the COVID issue, is the 65 plus seniors group. This is a group that Republicans, since the history of Gallup polling, have always won. You cannot win as a Republican without winning with senior 65 plus. Trump won them with a plus 11 share in 16. He's sitting at -9 right now. And that's important because it's also put the Arizonas in play, the Floridas more in play. These areas in the South with better weather and more retirees, these voters are their share of the Republican base. And so the opening of schools, all of these signs aren't necessarily about school kids. That's not the concern. The concern is not that they will necessarily get sick, although that's clearly an issue we ought to take into account. It's moving the virus and giving it life to ultimately hurt seniors. And seniors, I think, are very aware of that, and it's why we've seen those margins shrink.
Right, and just as an add-on, we should remember that it was one of Donald Trump's lackeys, Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, who started on the conservative side of things that seniors should sacrifice themselves on the altar of COVID to save the economy. So, he's not with you. He's not going to be with you. And then he signed that cockamamie executive order, was the last week or the week before, on the payroll tax piece, which, if you understand what that means, which means if he does it and makes it permanent, then Social Security and Medicare are going to run out of money. So it's, he is not a pro senior guy in any context of the world. Because he's not really a pro anybody guy. But certainly we've seen seniors disproportionately being hit. And I think, Ron, just not to make it too much longer, but, I think we're also going to see seniors economically, in a lot of hurt coming probably in the next 3-4 weeks. As we see a lot more cascading economic effects coming from this, especially now that rent and mortgage forbearance are coming to an end. The Republican Senate has, taken off until after Labor Day and are now, squawking about fiscal conservatism after all this time about the next stimulus tranche. So they're not on the side of the seniors in this country who, are my parents now, right? And even, some of our grandparents.
Yeah.
And Ron, really quickly, Mike talked about botched school openings. What happened when we had botched community and economy openings in these states that were led by Republican governors who felt like they had to somehow, kiss up to the president or remain his defender or something. They literally lost lives because they did it too soon and they did it wrong. And we heard one of those stories from that poor woman at the convention a couple of nights ago, whose father died, and said to her when they opened too soon, the president said it was okay. He wouldn't lie to us. He wouldn't put us in danger. And so if this happens with schools, if they screw it up, and to Mike's point, they then start to bring it back to life and spread it around the community again, it's going to have the same result. It's going to have the same outcome.
Look, Ron, I think for me, and there's probably thousands of people like this, you know, I've got a kid that's going to go back to school next week. And the joke is not that they're going back to school. It's like, how long is it going to last? A week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Somebody's going to get an infection, whether or not it's a child, an administrator, a teacher. They're going to shut everything down, you know, and they'll have to figure out what to do then. And I think a lot of districts are not prepared for this. I think we are, it is so many things. We're at a junction in this country. Clearly, public education is one of those where, you know, I mean, the way that we're taught is probably not that much different than the way my parents were taught when they were kids, you know, generally speaking. And so I think that, you know, a lot of these school districts are, you know, understaffed. The teachers, you know, I think in Houston, we're being asked to fill out wills before they come back to work. I mean, it's just, it's a terrible situation. And, you know, I think as Biden said last night, it didn't have to be this way. It was going to be bad. The thing is rampaging. It did not have to be nearly this bad.
Yeah. Okay, one more question. Reed, I'd like you to take this one. Elaine Gordon says, who provides the bulk of the funding for the Lincoln Project?
So people like you. Our average contribution, I think, Ron, is $55, $56. Yeah, the vast majority of the funds we raise come from everyday folks from Alaska to Florida and Maine to Hawaii. And we couldn't do it without you. And thank you. And just as an aside, Rick, Ron, I wore a Hawaiian shirt tonight because I'm taking the Hawaiian shirt back from the Bugaloo boys. Like, they could find something else. They could find the mesh tank top or something else as their symbol. The Hawaiian shirt belongs to us.
Well played. It is all about you, and we wouldn't be here.
Oh, all about me?
No. No, the people watching, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. Right. And Reed's exactly right. Our average contribution is about $50, and we're here because you continue to support us in this mission. Before we close, I want to make sure that we respond to a question that we asked on Twitter last night, which was how Donald Trump's failed coronavirus response has hurt you, and we got some really powerful responses to this question. Colleen wrote that her 17-year-old student lost his father after he was on a vent for 20 days. He was only 40 years old. His senior year will always be the year his dad died of COVID-19. Jack Kerouac says, my mother spent 8 days alone without any visitors in the hospital after surgery complications. Her last hospital stay was 52 years ago. She never complained, but I know it was torture. This pales in comparison to what so many have gone through, but it could have been avoided. And there's one more who says, I've lost a cousin to it. As a high-risk person, I've lost the ability to be with my family. My mother just celebrated her 80th birthday. I can't see my boys or my grandson. I may not have lost my life, but I've lost the ability to live my life. Wow. You guys, we got so many powerful responses to this question. And I just want to say to all the folks watching right now, because a lot of people ask what they can do, what they should say to other people who haven't made up their mind yet about who they're going to vote for. The most powerful persuasion tool any of us have are our own stories. And that's because we're asking all of you to let us know if you, your family, or your community have been personally impacted by the pandemic and the economic downturn because of Trump's incompetence and mismanagement. And if you're a Lincoln Republican or a Lincoln voter, your story can be incredibly helpful to convincing other people to have the courage to vote for Joe Biden. So we're going to drop a link in the Zoom chat right now and in the YouTube description wherever you're watching. And we're going to add it. We're going to add it everywhere this video will appear, so that you can submit your own story, because those stories are really powerful, and we'd like to share them if you're comfortable. We're also making a major advertising push in 8 battleground states right now: Arizona, Texas, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. We'd like you to help us stay on the air in these key swing states to elect Joe Biden and end Trump's time in the White House. If you can't contribute, please sign up on our website, lincolnproject.us, to learn more about the work that you're helping us do, future events, and what you can do to beat Donald Trump in November. We're coming up on time. So Rick, I'd like to go to you if I could impose for some closing remarks.
Not a problem, Ron. I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. You do us a tremendous honor with your support and your encouragement and the things that you have been willing to go out and volunteer to do. I mean, every day we have thousands of people who sign up to join the Lincoln Project, and more of them are asking, not only can I contribute, but what can I do? How can I engage? How can I be part of your team in Michigan or Florida or Arizona? And we've got a growing grassroots army. I want to encourage all of you, if you can donate, thank you so much. We deeply appreciate it. We put those dollars to work immediately to defeat Donald Trump. If you can't donate, or you want to put in sweat equity, volunteer with us. We're working very hard to get people out there. You'll be helping people get registered to vote, helping people get organized in key states, doing advocacy work that counts. You'll be making calls. You'll be sending people emails and sharing social, because we've reinvented grassroots campaigning because we had to. And we found that the people that have joined with us have a passion for this country, a commitment to America, and a commitment to saving it from this president. We're going to work together for the next 75 days or so. We're never going to rest until this is done. We're going to all have a moment when Joe Biden puts his hand on that Bible in January, where we know the work was worth it. And the long days, the long nights, the tough sacrifices were worth it. All of you make this worthwhile. You can rely on us to be in this fight till the very, very bitter end. We're never going to stop fighting. We're never going to stop punching for you. You know, the other night when Michelle Obama said, you know, when they go low, we go high, we tweeted out a very true thing. We go low so you don't have to. We're the pirate ship. We're the brawlers. We're going to be out there fighting every damn day. Keep helping us. Keep volunteering with us. If you can contribute, we are deeply appreciative. And we are also appreciative of the fact that you guys share our posts and our social media and our videos, because that is a way in the modern era of campaigning, the message truly gets out, and it means so much. I want to thank everybody for being with us tonight. And tune in next week for LPTV. We'll be streaming again. We put that together very short notice. It kind of was a crazy science experiment, and it seems to have worked. A lot of fun to be had next week with the RNC. You're going to see us every night of the RNC on LPTV for several hours of the evening, causing trouble. So thanks again so much, everybody. Look forward to talking to you again very soon.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.